Welcome to the T.U.N.E, the Urban Narrative Experience, where we bridge the gap between community and grassroots organizations that promote peace, environmental, social, and economic justice.
My name is Joseph Smith, and you are tuned in to the T.U.N.E. I'm sitting here with Bishop and Chief. Could you guys kind of talk about why you're here?
Thank you. We're here because oftentimes our community looking for information in all the wrong places and even get information that's not entirely accurate. So we're trying to get genuine and true looks at information from the powers that be and those that indeed have a good grip on what's factual and what's fiction. So we're excited today about being here with Chief of Police, and I think we need to hear from him.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm here to just try to help kind of get the message out and make sure that we're all talking about the same thing and in the same kind of conversation, right? So a lot of times we use words that are confusing, or our investigations come out and not everybody gets to see them. So just here to help set the record straight if we can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's extremely important, especially with some of the things that we talked about prior to this interview. We were talking about the recruitment of getting more minorities into the police department. And we talked about we were trying to uncover some of the barriers that was stopping that from happening. And the main one would be, like Bishop said, is the situation where people are being misinformed or they feel as if they don't have access to the information. So can you just kind of talk about that recruitment piece and how may have been challenging as far as the minorities go?
Yeah, so right now recruiting and policing is hard across the board. It seems to be even harder when we try to get a better representation of our minorities into our police force. Our goal is to make sure that we represent the city just the way it is in the police department as it is in the city population, right?
Yes,
And that way it gives us a chance to put officers in your neighborhood and everybody's neighborhood that gives them somebody that looks like them and talks like them and understands where they're coming from. And it ultimately leads to a better policing for us. It's a challenge because, policing's taken a hit over the last several years. So a lot of people don't want to become a police officer. So we've done a lot of things to try to change that. Our current recruiting campaign is going on right now. And with this new recruiting team that we put in February, they're having really good success on getting a lot more people out to take the test.
Awesome. And yeah, see, and that's the thing, like you were talking about with, those struggles and the new methods of recruitment, and you guys are running your campaign now. And we talked about, you kind of asked, hey, what are you hearing in the community? What's stopping from more minorities from applying? And it was less of our kids don't want to be police officers, because that's one of the first things that you hear them when they're in kindergarten. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a police officer. But it's those experiences that they have from those ages of the teenage years going into becoming an adult, where they're making that sound decision if that's not what they want to do. And the reason for that being is a lot of times, even with certain recent events with officers that may have shown some misconduct and things of that nature, the neighborhood is not informed on what happens to those officers. Sometimes even assume that nothing has happened. Can you kind of talk about how you guys handle these officers? You use words like demeanors, progressive discipline. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so obviously we have a standard for our officers on what we expect them to perform, policies and procedures that they're beholden to and that they have to actually follow, otherwise they get in trouble and get disciplined. One thing that comes forward that most people don't realize is the large majority of our discipline is internal, meaning that it's something that our officers, our command officers, are reviewing a video and they see something they don't like and they send it up to our internal affairs, and then they do an investigation. And that's where most of our discipline comes from. There are people that come into our internal affairs and file complaints, but it's on a much lesser scale than actually what we do internally. So if there's a complaint filed either internally or externally, just to kind of give you a quick overview of how it happens, it gets assigned to our internal affairs section, and if it's a minor complaint, then it gets sent back down to the shift, our command officers to investigate. But if it's something major, our internal affairs investigate it. And we have several command officers up inside that office that do those investigations, and they're usually very lengthy investigation, taking upwards of 100 days, because they look at every aspect of the encounter that they're investigating.
Yeah, and you spoke of external complaints, and we talked about like the proper stop and what you guys look for a civilian to do when they get stopped. What type of action should they take if they're experiencing an unruly officer? Can you talk about what type of techniques would you say are either the guidelines that you're supposed to follow or something that can just help you in the long run?
Yeah. So from a citizen's perspective, my number one thing I would say is, the Buffalo Soldiers do a great job of this and putting this message out there. It's comply now, complain later. All right. So the reality is, resisting on the street, resisting because you think you got pulled over for something you didn't do, is never going to have a good outcome. It's not good for the police department, and generally it is not good for our residents either, because it ends up in charges of resisting arrest, and then you end up in court and you get criminal charges. The reality is all of our officers are wearing body cameras. There's cameras inside the cars, and every incident is being recorded. So if you feel that you were truly wronged, the best avenue is to kind of comply. And if you get a ticket, fine, then you can contest that ticket. But then you can also come into our internal affairs section and file a complaint, and we'll look into that and find out what truly happened. And a lot of times, you don't understand the real reason you were pulled over, because if there's right off the bat, you're going, I didn't do anything wrong, and it kind of breaks down from there. Obviously, that's not good, because it leads to bad encounters.
Okay.
I got a question. So, if a traffic stop happens and you're in the passenger side, do you have to identify yourself also?
So it just depends. As a passenger, if you're not wearing a seatbelt, then you do have to identify yourself, because you could be issued a citation. As a passenger or any occupant in the car, what a lot of people don't understand is the law provides for us to remove you from the vehicle. And that's for officer safety reasons, and there's a variety of different reasons we might remove you from the vehicle. A lot of people feel like they don't have to get out of the vehicle, and that's where, it starts to go down that bad path.
Okay.
Another question, if you will, Chief. Perception, we know, is a horrible tool, or can be a misplaced tool in relations with people, with each other. And there in our community currently, and the Toledo community across the city, it seems that there is an anger or fear, even a symptom of assumed prejudice and racism. What trainings are in place, or what community approaches are being taken by the police department to sort out or improve these perceived notions that because you're blessed with an abundance of melanoma, you're automatically going to have some pain in the game rather than some justice? How do we approach those relationships that we might impress change and a need for change?
Okay, let's start with the way we train and the way we operate. So all of our officers go through de-escalation training, implicit bias training, and just to make sure the fact that we are operating based on conduct, right? So what the actions and the behaviors we see from somebody, not necessarily their race, gender, any of that kind of stuff, none of that really should come into play. And that's how we kind of focus and how we train to make sure that we're operating based on the actions of a subject or a suspect when we're having that encounter. So, as far as trying to fix that, that's tough. it's a long-standing problem that we've had, and it's something that's going to take us more time to overcome. And I think it's on both sides. We both need to come to the table on this, and we try to do different things through community engagements, through team initiatives, through block watch meetings, through neighborhood associations, or getting out to, if there's a festival or something like that, and having our community service officers out there interacting through our schools. In our schools, our school resource officers are an important part, and they're engaging our students on a daily basis and trying to bridge that gap and trying to, make sure that we all are hearing each other and understanding each other. Perceptions are reality sometimes for each individual, even though that may not be the true reality, right? But that's a hard thing to overcome when you believe it is true.
Sometimes, had an instance just a couple of days ago over on Woodlawn, where it appeared that an incident had taken place with a vehicle being stolen from a neighbor. And when one of the former block captains went to look at the cameras in the community or in the neighborhood, none of the cameras worked according to the conversation at the Scott Park Police Department. So it was given a number of names to contact to see why the cameras didn't work. Is it indeed the policy across the city that where lights are very poor of lighting the communities up, and there were cameras, that those cameras are disengaged to what they were purchased and placed there to do because there are some other mindsets of what's going to be approached in the communities, or is it a don't care attitude that's out there?
So when you're talking about cameras in the community, are you talking about city cameras, or are you talking about like individual household cameras?
City cameras.
Okay, so our cameras, if they're the ones that were the blue light cameras or the SkyCop cameras, as we used to call them, are all in the process of being replaced. The reality is those came on the poles over 10 years ago, and after 10 years on a pole outside, in our climate especially, things start to break down and break. So those that are not working should be taken off the pole already, but we're still in the process of removing them, and we're having new cameras that are going to be put up here eventually real soon. But no, there's no systematic policy or underlying agenda to say that we're stopping the cameras from working. Absolutely not. Those cameras are a benefit to us because we're already wearing cameras on our body. So to have another camera not operable would actually serve no purpose for us.
So here's the thing, it's awesome having you on, Chief. That's number one. Number two, I think this podcast that we're having gives us the opportunity to kind of give the community a voice, be able to be in touch with you, hear your opinion, and also make sure that, these next couple of years are going real smoothly as far as the relationship between the community and the police department, and possibly that can draw out some of the minorities to want to say, you know what, hey, Toledo's police department is different. So with that being said, like I said, giving that community a voice, there has been 2 incidents with the same officer, not going to bring up any names, but a lot of people may not know. We've talked about it. You've talked about disciplinary actions that's happened towards this officer. I would just like to talk about, not exactly what's happened with this officer, but that there has been disciplinary actions, and where can people see these disciplinary actions? What forms? We talked about forums and things that's put out there to the public to let our community know what's going on when an incident like that happens. So,
yeah. So obviously, those are 2 high-profile incidents, right?
Yes, sir.
And unfortunately, it did involve the same officer.
Yes, sir.
So, number one, when we complete an investigation, and especially like this one here, it's released to the media. So the Blade, all the news channels have it. It's also available by public record request if everybody ever wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful that a lot of times the Blade or the news channels will release inside their stories the entire investigation, because there is a lengthy investigation that went into the latest incident involving those 2 officers. And you're right, there was discipline. It's not always the discipline that everybody wants, but we have certain things that we have to kind of abide by. And, contractually, we operate under progressive discipline, which, just in a nutshell, it means if you continue to complete the same action over again, you get harsher and harsher punishments. So a suspension for a generally minor incident is not always what's normal. It's usually a reprimand. But when someone does it over again, then you kick it up to a suspension, and that could eventually end up in termination if they continue to exhibit those same kind of actions that we find are in violation of our policies.
And I've heard a lot of officers that the few minorities that do apply and plan to be officers, the number one thing they say is, what, I'm gonna get into the police department and I'm gonna change it from the inside. And that's something huge, because something we talked about was, you're like, hey, we can't discipline these officers by just firing them, because who's applying to be police officers? Can you kind of talk about that issue with the recruitment and how that plays a part with getting the right people in?
Yeah, so let's just talk about, I agree with you 100%. So, our biggest slogan right now is be the change you seek, right? So if you want to change something, then be a part of it. Don't just yell and put stuff up on social media, because that's not going to change anything.
Right.
So if you truly want to be a part of something, then join us.
Yes,
We'll have you. We'll love to have you. And when we talk about, firing officers, even if I tried to fire an officer, they have a right to arbitration through their contract. And if it's not a fireable offense, that's going to get overturned. And that officer is going to get their job back, their pay back, and likely have a lawsuit against the city. So we have to be just in what we do.
Right.
And you're right, there's not a lot of officers that are coming on board right now. So the fact of the matter is, if I discipline an officer and fire them, I have nobody to take their place right now. Now, do I want bad officers on the street? Absolutely not.
No.
But I have to be just in the way I punish people. And the reality is, there's a lot of money and time invested in somebody to become a police officer. So if I think that we can reform them and change their behavior, then by all means, taking those steps is way better than firing them and then shorting us on the street and eventually making our community less safe.
Right. And that's the thing. Everyone does deserve a second chance. But there's also a point to where it's like, okay, it's time to make a change. And speaking about change and recruitment and things of that nature, I actually have a family member who was applying for a city position, who was discriminated against, in turn stepped away from the position and was actually fired due to discrimination. So that's also a thing that a lot of people look at. It's like, hey, if I'm going to go into the police department, a predominantly white Caucasian space right now, how will I be treated? Will I be treated differently? How can I be ensured that I'm protected when I'm going through this recruitment process, when I'm trying to become a police officer? Will I be treated differently? Things of that nature. How can you make these new recruits feel safe that's coming in?
So, our official line is we treat everybody the same, right?
Yes, sir.
But the reality is this. We look at our minorities and trying to increase our minority recruiting and hiring, that, we're doing everything we can to get you through that door, to get you through the process, get you into our academy, and get you through our academy. We don't want to lose anybody. Our last 2 academies, we had the ability to hire 50 people. The last one we graduated 33, and we're already down under 35 right now. So we're unable to fill those spots. So I'm not turning anybody away based on any, superficial reason, meaning the way you look, the way you talk, or the way you act, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, act is kind of important, right? So if you have a huge criminal history, that's kind of troubling.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter that you're a minority, no, I encourage you to apply. I want you to apply, and we're going to do everything we can to get you through the academy.
So, real important, for sake of time, I want to definitely give you the opportunity to speak on some of the plans you have to address the violence. Because, the world we're living in right now, people are terrified for their youth, terrified to be outside, and you come in with a clean slate. We want to give you the opportunity to let people know that you have a plan. It's because a lot of people are saying, like, the mayor isn't making the statements, no one's making statements and addressing this violence, what's going on. And I'm pretty sure that people don't tune in like they say they do, but that's what we trying to do here, bridge those gaps. So you know,
Yeah,
you got the opportunity, you got the floor.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, yeah, the number one thing I did when I started coming in, so the last few years for law enforcement has been rough. Post COVID, post George Floyd, officers kind of took a step back because they didn't feel supported, and a lot of people were afraid to do their job. So the number one thing I did when I came in is make sure I got a good executive staff with me, and me and my senior leadership are going to our roll calls and we're talking to our officers and saying you're supported. You're not only supported by the law enforcement, supervisors, by the politicians, but by the community. Most importantly, by the community. By and large, our community wants our police out there doing the job because they don't want to be victimized. And unfortunately, it's been a scary place out here on the streets sometimes for the last couple of years. So the number one thing we do is getting our officers back engaged. Getting them out there doing their job that they're trained for, that they're paid for. That will immediately start to reduce crime, start to reduce some of the violence we're seeing just by having an officer presence out there. But we're also doing some different tactics. We know that a small minority or small number of people are doing the most of the violence, and by identifying them and going after them, we can get them off the street. And by doing it tactically like that, and you're surgically removing them instead of doing some of these widespread, zero tolerance, everybody gets stopped, your mom's getting stopped on the way to work, and everybody feels harassed because they're getting stopped. This allows us to get out there and actually target some of those individuals that, let's be honest, they're causing the most harm to our society. And they, not everybody needs to go to jail, but some people do need to be removed from society for a while to stop the victimization. And another thing that's going to be coming out here this beginning of next month is you're going to hear about dedicated foot patrol officers inside the neighborhoods. That's one of the things I've said I wanted to do, and we're going to be having officers out in a certain couple areas, and they'll be out there engaging with the community, the residents, getting able to learn and understand the neighborhood better. So us being out there and talking to people and making them understand that we're there, the biggest thing is people are afraid. The police are here for right now, but if I tell them something and then they leave, then the person I told on is going to do something, right? And so they fear the criminal more than they trust us. So we're looking to try to change that.
Right. And that's awesome. That's the thing that's something that's definitely has to be done as far as the violence goes, because along with that violence, like you said, there is a widespread, okay, we're going to stop everybody and things of that nature. Knowing the communities, knowing what cars are, what driveways, the peacemakers in the community. So that's definitely something we want to touch on as far as the violence and things goes over the summer. Bishop, you have anything else?
Lastly, newspapers are often looked at, newspapers and news outlets are often looked at as stories that affect their financial well-being more than the genuineness of the story itself. What can we as communities do? What can churches who seem to have a reputation of not being united or effective at bringing about change in our communities in a real way, what can we do as community to be in partnership with the police department without the community feeling so genuine that they're going to be attacked, even killed? I get a call about one particular case at least once or twice a week where there was a murder in one house and the family's there, and the person who alleged to have committed the crime in jail, out of jail, yet the threats continue to come, so they are afraid. But what do we do? What can we do as a community to bind with the police department and in a real way to make a difference? I realize it won't happen overnight, It's because there is a huge gap in trust on both sides. So what can we do from your point of view, Chief?
So, that's a great question because you are so spot on. The fact of the matter is this: the police department cannot do this alone. We have to have community engagement, community involvement. The reality is, an officer that spends 8 hours, even the officers that are going to be on foot for 8 hours inside a neighborhood, do not know that neighborhood like you do if you're living inside that neighborhood. So the reality is, you have more information than we could ever possibly gather on our own. And the reality is, we all need to come together. There's a lot of different factions. There's a lot of different agendas in this community, and people are doing their own thing. Somehow, we need to come together and start to build that trust. And then what we need to do is, at some point, our community has to say, enough's enough. Mm-hmm. We're tired of the violence. We're tired of everything happening, because let's be real about this, right? Who's it victimizing? The same community. So until we start standing up and saying, all right, enough of the pettiness, enough of our agenda, safety and making sure that my family is safe is more important than my specific agenda. Let's come together and figure out a way to do this, and figure out a way to come up forward and say enough's enough. We're not going to protect them. We're not going to hide them, or we're not going to, abide by the old adage that, snitches get stitches. There's ways for us to communicate with our residents in a way that protects their anonymity. And, taking advantage of that through Crime Stopper, through different tips lines, there's all kinds of ways to stay anonymous and actually provide information. And until we know the right people and we're able to go after the right people, unfortunately, our community is not going to be as safe as it can be.
Sure. All right. So with that being said, I want to thank you for coming on, Chief, and having this conversation with us, answering some questions for us, making the community may feel a little safer, or even just give them a more peace of mind knowing the direction that we're going in now. So that's all for us here on the T.U.N.E, and catch us next time.